So we have filled out our frequency table. Within this table, we have some extra things that we don't necessarily have to have every single time we have a frequency table. But all of these different items get used for a variety of different types of graphical representations when we go through and we are going to start talking about graphing these. So if we look at the next thing down here, our vocabulary, we have the word histogram. And a histogram is a graph consisting of bars of equal width drawn adjacent to each other. The horizontal scale represents classes of quantitative data values, and the vertical scale represents frequencies. The heights of the bars correspond to the frequency value. A key thing to note with a histogram is that the bars must be touching each other. And so down here, example 5 is going to have us create a histogram or construct a histogram and a frequency polygon. So some important notes about histograms. One thing to note about a histogram is that the horizontal axis must be labeled either using midpoints or class boundaries. We never use the lower class limits and the upper class limits to mark off our horizontal axis. The other big thing that happens with histograms is that all bars must be the same width and need to be touching. Now, you can have a class where there is no data. Say, for example, if our row in our chart here, let's say that this row here, this second from last one, that class had not 1 but 0 items in it, then you would end up with a gap in your table. But that only happens if you have a class that has nothing in it amongst all of your other classes. So just remember that your bars are going to touch. So always make sure you label. So we're going to call this vertical axis, this is our frequency. And the horizontal axis is temperature. And specifically temperature in degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm going to use class midpoints. I feel like class midpoints is a little easier to utilize than the boundaries. So I'm going to start right here. I'm going to make this 102. And then I'm going to make the next one 107. And then 112. 117, 122, 127, and the last one I'm going to run out of room, will be 132. On my vertical axis for my frequency, I'm going to go by 2s because I need to get all the way up to 18. And I'm going to give this a title. This is highest recorded temps. And then I need to go ahead and I need to draw in my bars. So this one that has a midpoint of 102, there were 2 items in that class. That has a frequency of 2. So I'm going to make a bar that goes up to 2. Then my next one has 8 items in it. So the next bar is going to go up to 8. And my third one is going to go all the way up to 18. Then I will go to 13. 13 is between 12 and 14. Then 7. 1. And then my last one has 1. I'm going to go off my graph just a tiny bit here. Extend it. And so there is my histogram for these recorded temperatures. The next one we're going to look at is a frequency polygon. So a frequency polygon uses line segments that are connected to points located directly above class midpoint values. So notice that it says class midpoint values. This is a different type of graphical representation of our data. Essentially, it is our histogram, except for instead of putting the bars, you're going to have lines that are between the midpoint, which is at the top of each bar. So on the next page, we have our frequency polygon and some important notes about our frequency polygon. The first one is that the horizontal axis must be labeled using class midpoints. And this is a polygon. Polygon, if you remember from geometry, is a closed shape. So it needs to be a closed figure or shape. Therefore, the graph must connect to the x-axis. So again, our y-axis, our vertical axis, is going to be our frequency. And our horizontal axis, again, is going to be temperature in degrees Fahrenheit. And we need to have class midpoints on this. So I'm going to start over here at 102. You always need what would be the midpoint of a class before the one that you're utilizing. So if we took 102 and subtracted 5, we would end up with 97. Then we have 107, 112, 117, 122, 127, 132, and we always need one past that, which would be 137. And again, frequency, I'm going to go by 2s. And this is highest recorded temperatures. Give it a title. So what we're going to do is the frequency of each class, we're going to mark it off above the midpoint. So here at 97, there's no data. We have to start on the x-axis, so that's why we put that 97 there. At 102, we had a total of 2. So at 102, I'm going to go up to 2 and put a dot. 107, that second class that had 107 as the midpoint, has 8 items. So I'm going to go up and put a dot at 8. And then the next one had 18. The one after that had 13. Then 7 for 122. Midpoint of 127 had 1 item. And 132 had 1. And 137, it has none. And so what we have to do now is we have to draw a straight line between each of the dots. And that is our frequency polygon.